Hey guys, what's going on? Laying back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about No One Gets Out Alive. No One Gets Out Alive is an American horror movie that tells the story of a woman named Ambar, an illegal immigrant freshly landed in Cleveland, Ohio, who has nowhere to stay in the area except for a run-down 3-story house in a bad part of town. Once she gets settled in, it doesn't take long for her to start experiencing difficulties on account of her being an illegal immigrant, as well as her to eventually discover that the building that she lives in appears to be haunted. Faced with disturbing sounds, eerie nightmares, and creepy landlords, Ambar has to find a way to escape her circumstances while surviving the horrors of the house at the same time. It's very much one of those low-budget, one-woman show kind of movies. There are other characters that are spread throughout the story, but they don't have anywhere near as much depth as the protagonist, who thankfully is portrayed very well. I have to admit, I was a bit skeptical about supporting Ambar as the main character at first due to her being an illegal immigrant, but once the movie starts to explore her backstory as events progress, that's when I started to become more understanding and sympathetic toward her character. Ambar is a woman who was and is being dealt a very bad hand at life. Her mother passed away from cancer and she's still grieving over her death, and she's reluctant to reach out for help from family members who happen to be living in America because they're not aware of her lack of citizenship. Because of this, Ambar is constantly carrying around this trauma wherever she goes that weighs her down, and this is only aggravated more by all the horrible things that happen to her when she's in America, such as when she gets money stolen from her, when she loses her job, and of course all the terrifying things that happen to her in her apartment building. She runs away from her old life in her previous country in order to start a new one in America, but even in America, her past still catches up to her, so she's forced to confront her demons head on in order to be able to move past them and finally start living life the way she wants to. And I thought the way that whole arc played out throughout the story was brilliant. The rest of the characters in this movie aren't anything special. They mostly just exist to help move the story along as it goes. They're not really bad characters per se, they just don't have a lot of depth and backstory behind them compared to Ambar. There is something to be found in the creepy landlord Red and his brother Becker, but other than those two, that's it. As is standard with horror movies, this one is packed with plenty of thrills and chills, most of which concern the ghosts and apparitions that live in the same building as Ambar does, as well as the violent events that take place inside that same building. And if I'm being honest, I'm a bit divided as to what I think about the overall execution of the horror in this movie. I think the ghosts were designed well from an aesthetic point of view. They appear just enough times in the movie to keep the viewer on edge without being completely in your face, and there's not even as many jump scares in the movie as you might expect. The ghosts are mostly content to just stand around and stare menacingly at whoever walks past them. Their design isn't exactly original, but it's still effective. But as scary as the ghosts can be, after a while it starts to get old seeing them stand in one place all the time and constantly staring daggers at people. Plus, there's only one scene where we get any sort of backstory as to how all those ghosts ended up in the house. There is a lot of potential to be found in them, but the movie never takes full advantage of it. Also, because this movie is rated R, it has its fair share of gory violence in it as well, although I don't think it's too excessive, at least compared to modern slasher movies, for example. What I like most about the horror in this regard is that a lot of it still takes place off-screen, which leaves it up to the viewer's imagination to interpret what's happening behind closed doors, which I feel enhances the overall horror vibe of the situation. One thing that did confuse me about the horror in this movie though is that it all seemed to revolve around this mystic metal box that appears to be connected to every character who also happens to be associated with the building in this movie in some way, shape, or form. Again, we don't get a whole lot of detail and backstory as to what that box and all the monsters inside it are all about. Maybe there are a few details spread throughout the rest of the movie that I just happened to miss, but for whatever reason I still found myself puzzled as to what the overall importance was behind that box. This is a theme that I noticed throughout the movie at large. It's aesthetically impressive, but apart from a few vague artifacts and some brief snippets from the landlord Red, the story is lacking a basic mythology and details and just focus in general. Ambar is regularly seen going back and forth between her house and the job where she works. Now from a story point of view, this does make sense, but it happens so often that it kinda ruins the flow of the whole claustrophobic horror vibe that this movie is supposed to be building. And that's not to say that the movie doesn't attempt to be scary outside the house itself. There are these dream sequences that Ambar takes part in which she's seen interacting with her environment in some sort of terrifying scenario that occurs outside the house, only for her to wake up at the very end and realize she's still in her house and it was all just a nightmare. Again, while these sequences are interesting from a visual point of view, I found them to be more distracting than they were scary. All of this being said though, I gotta say that I loved how ambiguous this movie's ending was. I'm obviously not going to spoil it in this review, but I like how it ended on a will she, won't she kind of scenario, in that it keeps the audience guessing as to whether or not that she learned something at the end of her journey and wondering what she's going to do next. Overall, No One Gets Out Alive is a slightly above average haunted house flick that's elevated thanks in part to its main character, but I feel like the movie could have been a lot better than it was. If you like horror movies and you're looking for a rated R haunted house story that has a strong main character trying to overcome a struggle, I think you'll enjoy watching this movie. I know I kinda said this already, but I feel like I should have liked this movie a lot more than I did. It has a great main character, but every other character falls flat, and there are some scares to be found, but they all end up losing their luster as the story continues on, so in the end, this movie sits squarely in the middle of the road for me. Anyways guys, that's gonna wrap up my review of No One Gets Out Alive. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the Spanish rom-com Sounds Like Love. Bye bye!